Sasaki was your average salaryman who lives a boring life, but when he has a midlife crisis and adopts a bird as a pet, it turns out to be a powerful mage from another world, and it gives him the ability to use magic. The story begins with Sasaki getting ready for work. His colleague Kohai asks for help with his report. Sasaki offers to do it for him so they can be more efficient, and he tells Kohai to focus on other things. Meanwhile, a girl talks about the new cat she adopted, and this interests Sasaki as he sees them watching videos of the cat. Kohai invites him for food after work, but he declines since his budget is tight. When he returns home, his neighbor greets him, and he spends his evening watching cute pet videos. The next day, he goes to a pet shop, where he checks the cats and dogs, but is surprised to learn how expensive they are. He complains about his low salary, which prevents him from having the pet of his dreams. As he explores the place, Sasaki finds a bird on sale, thinking it looks adorable, so he decides to take it home. He puts it in a cage, enchanted by its cuteness, and he notes how he has been feeling lonely with his 40th birthday approaching, so he thinks he made a great choice adopting a pet. He remembers that he needs to name it, but before he could decide by himself, the bird says his name is Piercarlo, and he introduces himself as a great star sage, saying he comes from another world. Sasaki is surprised to hear this, but he knows that some birds tend to talk. He thinks a little and decides to call him Peeps. He asks Peeps what he would like to eat, and the bird says that he wants Kobe beef, since the store owner said it's the best food in the world. Even though he wants to give the best to his pet, Sasaki says he can't afford to serve him that dish, but Peeps tells him that he just needs to earn more. Peeps suddenly starts a monologue about his life, saying he was expelled from his world, while Sasaki listens attentively. Peeps tells Sasaki to cooperate with him, saying he will no longer have problems getting money if he decides to help. So he agrees to collaborate with Peeps, who decides to share his powers with him. He doesn't understand what's happening, but he decides to see it through to the end. Sasaki releases him, and Peeps walks up to his shoulder. Peeps says that he can now use Sasaki's body as a vessel to exert his power, which is better than the body of a small bird. Peeps suddenly teleports them to another world, which is the one he used to live in before being reborn as a bird, and they reach a peaceful city called Batrium. The next day, he returns to work, and Kohai starts a conversation with him, wondering how he managed to arrive so early, since all the trains were delayed. He asks Sasaki to talk later, and during the break, Kohai tells Sasaki that he's going to start his own business, and wants him to join his project, since it would be great to have someone experienced like him. But he says that he needs time to think about it, saying his life is busy now that he started raising a pet, and Kohai is surprised to hear this. Sasaki begins to remember when he was in Peeps' world, and how his life changed after seeing it. We learn that the teleportation spell helps him get to work earlier, and without that stress, he can focus on his project with Peeps, conducting business between the two worlds. He stops at a supermarket to buy his items, and after selling them in the other world, he realizes each coin is worth 100 million yen. The man becomes curious, asking him where he gets his products, but Sasaki says he must keep it a secret, and promises exclusivity of his products, hoping they can work well together. He continues traveling between the two worlds, and making money from the nobles, while also starting to study magic with Peeps, excited to learn the teleportation spell. As they walk through the city, they come across an employee named French, who is being expelled from the restaurant where he works. Sasaki approaches him to find out what happened, and after getting the details, Sasaki learns that he's been training to be a great chef since childhood. But his skills attracted the envy of his co-workers, so they falsely accused him of stealing the restaurant's money, just to get him fired. Sasaki notes that he seems like a good professional, and thinking about his situation, he invites him to open a restaurant together. Sasaki introduces him to Mark, a noble from a company, and requests the necessary equipment to open the restaurant. They finally open the establishment in a noble location of the main village, and upon receiving his first salary, French is moved, determined to give his best for the restaurant. Sasaki continues to practice magic in the other world, and although he made a lot of progress, he has trouble mastering teleportation. Returning to his world, Peeps remembers that the nobles enjoy hunting in their free time, so they decide to buy some products to assist them. He starts by buying a pair of binoculars, and soon fills the cart with more items like a Swiss Army knife. Sasaki sells the items to the nobles, and soon after, the lord of the city decides to meet with him. Unlike the other nobles, the lord, Muller, is more cautious in doing business, so Sasaki thinks that he should bring higher quality items when negotiating with him. Muller asks if the products are common on Sasaki's continent or if they are high quality items. So he explains that these items are special and are only used by the privileged class of his people. Hearing this, Muller thinks that Sasaki must be an important noble, so he asks Sasaki if he's a person of considerable standing. He's afraid of getting caught lying about being a noble, so he explains he's a craftsman who was brought to the continent after his shipwreck, and his items are samples of things he brought with him. So Muller allows him to sell his products, but Muller must have priority for each sale. He allows Sasaki to enter and leave the mansion as he pleases, and asks him to inform him if he has something that can benefit his people. The two shake hands, and Sasaki achieves his goal of establishing connections with the city's lord. Back in his world, Sasaki realizes that today is Kohai's farewell party. They meet at a restaurant, where Kohai wonders if Sasaki would join his new company, and Sasaki says he can't. Kohai thinks it would have been nice to have him in his company, saying he has been much more vibrant these last few days. On his way home, Sasaki thinks about what Kohai said, but he suddenly notices a woman being attacked by a man using magic. So he intervenes with an ice spell. The ice begins to spread on the man's body, and since Sasaki doesn't know how to control the power, he thinks that the man is about to die, but the woman dissolves his ice. Seeing that he also has psychic powers, she asks him if he has a registration, telling him to accompany her. He asks to stop by his house, and she suggests bringing clothes, because he'll be spending the night elsewhere. Packing his bag, Peeps warns him that she doesn't seem to have much mana, and since she refers to magic as something psychic, Peeps thinks that her powers must be different from the magic of his world. Leaving the house with Peeps, Sasaki meets his neighbor, who tells him that she wants to talk to him. But Sasaki says he's in a hurry, so she agrees to talk another time. Sasaki meets the girl and apologizes for the delay, saying he will take his pet with him. She reveals that her name is Hashizaki, and she thanks him for saving her. Along the way, she explains that psychics are like mages, with powers that appear spontaneously, and only 1 in 100,000 manifests these psychic abilities. Hashizaki explains that she can manipulate water and alter its temperature. She informs him that many of these abilities are dangerous, so people often use them to commit crimes, and her job is to eliminate such people. She reveals that when the psychic manifestation occurs for the first time, they're required to register with the supervising authority in Japan. This is a secret organization, and few people in the country know about its existence. Upon arriving at a large building, Hashizaki tells Sasaki that he will be working there, and that he will receive all the details of the job during his training. She asks him to demonstrate his power, and Sasaki decides to show only one spell to not raise suspicions. Seeing that he can create ice out of nothing, she becomes excited, because she can control water, but not create it, thinking their abilities work well together. He's worried about partnering with a workaholic, and tries to say that he's not the adventurous type, but Hashizaki reminds him that they can earn a lot of money if they work hard. He remembers his commitments, and wants to ask Peeps to be transferred to the other world, but he's worried that the place might be surrounded by cameras. So he decides to go outside, and Peeps informs him that they're being followed. Sasaki thinks about notifying his contacts in the other world about his delay, and Peeps tells him that an hour in his world is just a few minutes there, so he could go there while the man thinks he went to the bathroom. They enter the other world, where Sasaki informs Mark that it will take longer for the next negotiation, and he's able to give French his salary. Back to Japan, Hashizaki knocks on his door at 6 in the morning, saying they have a mission. He asks to speak to his supervisor, so he meets the director Akutsu, who tells him he will undergo training. Akutsu gives him a smartphone, telling him to always keep it close, because through this phone, he will be notified of emergency missions. This slightly worries Sasaki, because he could no longer relax, but he plans to circumvent this by leaving his cell phone in the other world, since they can't track him without GPS. Sasaki undergoes a series of medical tests, and receives his training. When he returns home, the young girl gives him cookies, but soon her image as a cute college girl falls apart, and she reveals herself to be a yandere psychopath, asking if he's dating Hashizaki. He denies this, saying she's just his supervisor, but he doesn't want to talk much about his company, so Sasaki bids her farewell and quickly enters his house. Peeps is strangely agitated, and Sasaki calls him for a walk. On the street, Peeps informs him that someone entered his house during the day and installed a device, so Sasaki thinks that they might have installed a camera or listening device to monitor him. As he returns home, he removes the device and speaks to Akutsu on the phone, telling them not to install more devices in his house. However, Akutsu reveals that this was a test conducted with new members of the organization and informs Sasaki that he passed. Akutsu explains that the company needs loyal and competent agents, and he ends the call as Peeps suggests that they should be cautious around him. In the other world, Sasaki practices magic, and Peeps is impressed with his progress, because he didn't expect him to learn intermediate spells so easily. Sasaki doesn't find it that impressive, and suggests it's because of the power that Peeps shared with him, but Peeps insists that it's still notable, because in this world, magicians take decades to learn intermediate spells, so doing it in weeks is incredible. Afterward, Sasaki notes down his progress, and in today's session, he learned healing and lightning spells. Peeps praises his dedication, but Sasaki comments that memorizing the chants is becoming difficult. Peeps suggests he use a grimoire, making Sasaki think about anime and games. He asks where he can get one, and Peeps reveals that he has one in his hand. It turns out grimoires are just the generic term for an item that stores enchantments, and they don't have to be made of paper or ink, so his phone works perfectly. Sasaki is surprisingly happy with this, and he says it's time to meet with Mark. After that, he suggests eating something made by French. At the meeting with Mark, Sasaki negotiates some walkie-talkies, which Mark finds amazing, but Sasaki explains that they run on fuel and need to be recharged. Mark is still impressed, and even offers 100 gold for each battery. Sasaki is happy that his products are being well received, and he's glad he won't be stuck with the inventory. Mark thanks him for providing the items, and Sasaki apologizes for the recent delay, but Mark doesn't mind and asks if the things have settled down. Mark asks if he has any more stock, making an offer to buy everything, and Sasaki wonders why. So Mark reveals that Muller ordered him to buy the entire stock if he saw a good product, but he whispers to Sasaki, thinking that the growing tension with the neighboring nation might be the real reason, and it could be the prelude to something bigger, telling Sasaki to take care of himself. They see French outside the restaurant, and as they approach, Sasaki notices that business is going well. He hands French the payment for the month, who is surprised by the amount, and Sasaki also gives him a list of new recipes to learn. French suggests they go in to eat something. The two are glad to enjoy French's food, and after that, they return to the modern world. In the morning, Sasaki is awakened by a call from Hashizaki, informing him about a mission. She wonders if he got the notice from the director. He looks at his phone and finds several missed calls, so he hurries to work. When he gets there, Hashizaki scolds him for not always being ready, since it's his duty as an agent, making Sasaki apologize. Some veterans approach, and the director introduces them to their new colleague. After greeting Sasaki, they mention they'll go ahead, teasing Hashizaki to have fun as a nanny. In the director's office, they are informed about an operation to arrest a mass of unregistered psychic users. Sasaki questions if the arrest is just for not being registered, but the director explains they are an organized group, and one of the members caused damage with his powers. Sasaki recognizes the man who attacked Hashizaki among them, and the director states that the others are accomplices. Since they discovered their hideout, they are going to be captured to prevent further damage. On the way to the mission, Sasaki is nervous, but Hashizaki reassures him, saying he won't fight directly. Sasaki asks if she isn't afraid, but she says that high risks bring higher rewards. She counts on his support, but Sasaki only worries about if the job has workers' comp. They arrive at the location, and everyone gets into formation. As they prepare, Sasaki regrets that he didn't learn a protective barrier skill. Director Akutsu leads the operation from a mobile HQ, and soon gives the orders to start, but as they enter the hideout, they realize it's empty. They suspect they might be in the wrong place, but Hashizaki has a bad feeling. She suggests they leave, but suddenly, they hear a scream over the communicator, losing contact with the HQ. The soldiers panic, and soon a bowling pin crushes one of their heads. Bowling balls and pins start levitating, creating a tornado, and Hashizaki realizes they've fallen into a trap. Sasaki thinks the enemy might have wind control, but he doesn't feel any wind force in the room, so he concludes that it's telekinesis. The soldiers scream as they realize they're facing high-level psychic users. Some of them flee, and flying objects knock several of them down. A soldier launches an energy attack against the whirlwind, but it doesn't work. Sasaki is scared, but Hashizaki asks for his support. She advances, and Sasaki casts an icicle. Hashizaki quickly turns the ice into water and creates a shield to defend herself. They remain on the defensive, and one of their colleagues is lifted by the psychic. He begins to fall, but Hashizaki manages to cushion his fall with her water. The situation worsens, so she orders Sasaki to get away, but Sasaki knows she's exhausted and needs his water supply, so he decides to stay, saying he can't leave her behind. Hashizaki starts to admire him, while Sasaki thinks that being a deserter is a serious crime. Suddenly, they hear a voice, and one of the psychics reveals herself, surprised that there are still survivors, since she wasn't expecting such a good fight. Hashizaki starts to levitate, but when she starts to fall, she uses her water to save herself. She quickly turns the water into ice, surprising the psychic with her ability to also control its temperature. Hashizaki attacks her, but the girl easily dodges. Hashizaki prepares a barrage of attacks, but the girl keeps evading while approaching her. She touches Hashizaki, and somehow she faints, but the girl decides not to kill her due to her valuable ability. She calls out for Sasaki, threatening to kill Hashizaki if he doesn't reveal himself. Realizing the total failure of the mission and the defeat of his squad, Sasaki thinks he has no choice but to reveal himself. The psychic notices he's an unfamiliar face, making Sasaki begin to introduce himself. She finds him unlikable and quickly realizes he was the water source for Hashizaki. She acknowledges the efficiency of the duo, and Sasaki tries to regain some ground, so he praises her abilities, trying to extract some information. He asks about the name of her group, surprising her with his lack of knowledge, and the girl starts to smile, realizing he's a newbie. Sasaki tries to get more information, but she refuses to reveal anything. She notices he's calm, and Sasaki realizes he won't get any information, so he takes off his headphones and starts reciting a chant. This confuses the girl, but she soon realizes the danger while lightning bolt comes at her. The girl is startled by this, and more objects are thrown at Sasaki, but he manages to dodge and casts a lightning spell at that direction, knocking down two hidden psychics. The girl questions who he is, and he says that he's just a recruit. He offers a truce, suggesting a draw if she keeps silent about what she saw, and allow everyone to leave. The girl accepts this and asks his name. She proposes that he join them, but Sasaki declines, preferring to follow the majority. She tells him to speak to her if he changes his mind, because they would love to have his abilities. Before leaving, he questions her about his superiors, and she decides to release them, before disappearing. The day ends, and Sasaki reports that the enemy withdrew on their own. Akutsu is suspicious of him, but decides to believe it for now and apologizes for putting him in danger on his first mission. Sasaki is dismissed, and he goes to see Hashizaki, who is grateful for being saved. They go out for dinner as her way to say thank you, and while Sasaki orders a beer, Hashizaki asks for an orange juice, revealing that she is only 16 and still goes to school, but says she dresses older since she doesn't want to be underestimated because of her age. Sasaki thinks a normal 16-year-old would have other interests, and doesn't consider this a good use of her time. But Hashizaki explains that it's actually simple, because the job pays well, and they make a toast, commemorating their first job together. On the way home, Sasaki encounters a strange child. He thinks about reporting it, but hesitates because of the paperwork. He finally decides to call someone, but as he takes out his phone, he realizes she has disappeared. He suddenly sees the girl levitating, and a strange portal opens. She tells him goodbye, flying through the portal, and Sasaki is left wondering what just happened. Back at home, Sasaki surprises PEEPS with the Kobe beef he wanted. PEEPS becomes excited about the meal, and Sasaki thanks him for all his help. PEEPS starts eating and can't believe the taste of it, while Sasaki wants to take a picture of him. Sasaki helps him clean up, and tells him about his first mission. He asks to learn a barrier spell, and PEEPS agrees, suggesting a healing spell as well. Sasaki considers this urgent, so he asks PEEPS to teach him after his meeting with Mark. He gets excited imagining the soft bed and French's food he will have after training, but nothing goes as planned, and he's surprised when the Viscount talks about a war. Sasaki realizes that Mark was right, and Mahler says that the king ordered him to go to the front lines. The enemy is the Ogan Empire, a powerful kingdom with a large number of troops. Their force is twice as big, so if their army reaches the city, they will cause great damage. Sasaki is caught off guard when Mahler asks for his help. He wonders how to refuse, since he prefers to stay away from wars and politics. He says that he's just a craftsman, so he doesn't think he can help. But Mahler points out that the items that he has brought would be of great help in the war, so he asks for his exclusive services during the war. Mahler also points out how it takes 2 weeks by carriage to reach the front lines, so gathering and transporting the necessary items in a month would be impossible. He tried to negotiate with the city's companies, but there was an increase in food prices, so forcing the trade companies to help would be even worse for the economy than the war. Sasaki thinks about the Viscount's difficult position, since the king ordered him to build strongholds and feed the front lines. Since he's a noble serving the crown, he's forced to obey, or else he would lose his title. Sasaki thinks about what he should do, and asks him why he doesn't just leave the city and save his family. Mahler suddenly asks if he has ever heard of the Star Sage, and this surprises the duo, but Sasaki pretends that he hasn't. Mahler explains that their kingdom was a prosperous land, blessed with magical technology, but a group of nobles caused most of the mages to leave, except for an incredibly talented mage known as the Star Sage, who managed to maintain peace on his own. But that came to an end, when a faction of nobles resented him for the favor the king showed him, so they had him killed, and since then, the kingdom has been plagued by corruption and decline. Mahler thinks about how the nobility brought this fate on themselves, but he can't abandon the city out of respect for the Star Sage, so he plans to be a true lord and give his last breath to protect his people. Sasaki apologizes for making such a foolish suggestion and agrees to provide goods for the city, as long as Mahler promises him something. After the meeting, Sasaki goes back to the town, and PEEPS wonders why Sasaki agreed to help the Viscount, since he shouldn't worry about him. But Sasaki dismisses it, and wants to know how PEEPS thinks the war will end. PEEPS imagines that the kingdom will probably lose, and Sasaki admits that he wants to help if he can. PEEPS thinks his magic could change the course of the war, since destroying is easier than creating, but he also thinks that the relationship Sasaki has created with the city shouldn't be so easily abandoned. Sasaki agrees, but wants them to try to solve it in a less flashy way. They go after French's food, but when they arrive at the restaurant, they see a group of angry chefs. Sasaki notices French's expression, so he asks what happened. French tells them that his old boss wants him to sell his ingredients at a discount. He feels indebted to him for teaching everything he knows, but doesn't want to disrespect Sasaki, who took him off the streets and gave him the restaurant. Sasaki understands the situation, so he asks him to let him know if this happens again, so that he can take countermeasures. French is afraid of bothering Sasaki, but he doesn't find it a bother, because he just wants to keep him and the restaurant safe. Sasaki starts to feel the effects of the war with the increase in food prices, so he decides he should take action soon. The two go to New Sonia to visit the Kepler Trading Company, one of the largest companies in the city. At the meeting with the company merchant, Sasaki delivers a list of all the desired items, but the man assumes that for a purchase on this scale, it means there's a war ahead, so he remembers the rumors he has heard about the lands to the south. Sasaki confesses that it's a request for a country at war, and the man doesn't seem to have any issue with it, but points out the challenges of transporting so much equipment. The man reminds Sasaki of a sales representative from a large company in his own world, so he decides to use his experience with them to close the deal. The merchant notes that Sasaki doesn't seem to be from this continent, but Sasaki thinks that people like him can move around more easily. Sasaki tells the man that where he comes from, they don't need status or reputation to gain the good faith of other merchants, but just the ability to make profit. The man seems satisfied with this answer, so he asks about the payment. Sasaki intends to only do business with the Kepler house, and he will pay with gold coins from the kingdom. After the meeting, Mahler seems surprised that Sasaki managed to fill the warehouse so quickly. He doesn't know how to thank Sasaki, because the supplies will buy them time and help save thousands of lives. Sasaki is happy to be useful, when suddenly, the Count asks if he knows any teleportation spells like the Star Sage. Sasaki recalls how PEEPS transported everything to the warehouse, but he draws attention to himself, asking the Lord to just keep it between them. Sasaki asks why they call the mage the Star Sage, so Muller says that it's because he knew more spells than the number of stars in the sky. PEEPS still remembers how he blushed when they called him that, and Sasaki looks at him and remembers the time they met, finding it funny how he proudly introduced himself with a nickname that embarrassed him. When the day ends, Muller thanks Sasaki again for what he did, and is happy that they talked a bit about the Star Sage. But 1 month later, Sasaki is informed about the death of Muller. He is distracted in the office, but Akutsu catches his attention, telling him that there's a promotion for him. The last mission led to many injuries among the agents, so there are many positions that need to be filled. Akutsu hands him his inspector card, but Sasaki doesn't seem happy to be promoted. Akutsu shows him his next mission, which is to recruit psychics with Hashizaki. Sasaki doesn't want to work with her, but when Akutsu points out the dangers one might face against unregistered psychics, Sasaki remembers the last mission, and he ends up agreeing. On his way home, Sasaki hopes PEEPS is feeling better about the death of the Viscount. Before entering, his neighbor calls him, offering him a shoulder massage, but it's a strange suggestion, so Sasaki refuses, but gives her some food he got on the way. He enters the house and notices PEEPS quietly watching TV. The two sit down to eat together, and Sasaki asks if he was close to the Viscount. PEEPS says he wouldn't use the word close, but they shared some drinks, and he's more shocked because he thought he would live longer than that. Sasaki asks if there are spells that can bring people back from the dead, but PEEPS doesn't think it's possible. He asks if there's anything in the modern world that can do it, but Sasaki tells him that there isn't. PEEPS reflects that participating in life means they must perish, and that everyone will meet this same fate. Sasaki offers to help if there is anything he can do, and PEEPS thanks him for the gesture. Back in the other world, French reveals that Muller's death led many to leave the city, but suddenly, the conversation is interrupted by Mark, who informs Sasaki that Muller's butler wants to talk to them. They go to meet Sebastian, where he introduces them to Lady Elsa, the youngest daughter of Muller. The butler explains that there's a succession war between Maximilian and Kai, the two sons of Muller. Elsa thinks Kai is an idiot, and the family would be ruined if he takes over. Sebastian explains that Elsa is closer to Maximilian, and he asks that the Herman Trade Company take care of Elsa until the fight between her brothers is over. Mark is taken aback, but he agrees in the end. Sebastian also asks for some communication equipment from Sasaki. He finds Sebastian a bit suspicious, but decides to accept his request. However, at night, we see Sebastian making a call, talking about how the plan is going well. He explains that greedy nobles surround the two brothers, and now that Muller is gone, the spark between them is turning into a fire. Sasaki and PEEPS dine with Elsa, and she praises their food. Sasaki thanks her, reflecting on how French did a great job, and Elsa is also impressed with PEEPS, begging Sasaki to let her pet him. He agrees, and PEEPS jumps to her hand. She starts petting his head, astonished by how pleasant it is, and PEEPS seems to enjoy it too, making Sasaki jealous, but she accidentally hits his eye, making him scream, and Elsa is shocked, wondering if he just spoke. Sasaki tries to cover it up, but she insists he screamed. Mark suddenly appears, and he tells them to go back to the castle immediately. At the castle, Sebastian presents her brother's swords covered in blood, explaining that they were found in the forest. Elsa is shocked, and Sasaki asks what happened. Sebastian says they don't know, but the traces suggest that a brutal battle occurred, so they must fear the worst. Without her father and her brothers, he mentions that it's Elsa's duty to take over as the head of the family. Sasaki thinks that this isn't the right time, but Sebastian continues, saying that if she doesn't do it, the family will be dissolved. Elsa is nervous, but he explains she can just accept a name, while he takes care of the estate affairs until she marries. She feels pressured and accepts, as Sebastian swears to support her. Returning from the castle, they see a group of people evacuating. Mark explains that the king's forces were defeated at the front lines, so the citizens are seeking safer places, and attacks on neighboring regions had already begun. Mark decides to take refuge in the capital with Elsa for a while, so he asks Sasaki if he wants to join them, but Sasaki tells him not to worry about him. Mark feels bad for Elsa, because her first duty will be to abandon the lands her family has cared for generations. After that, Sasaki and Peeps watch the sunset. Peeps wants to make a request, but Sasaki already knows what he wants and agrees to turn the tide of the war. Peeps thanks him, and Sasaki asks if they should use teleportation. Peeps remembers they don't know the enemy's location, so he decides to use another method. We see Sasaki flying, and he finds it amazing, because humanity has always dreamed of flying without technology, so he asks Peeps to teach the spell later. They see the enemy camp, and Sasaki wonders what they should do. Peeps decides to eliminate them with a single attack, since there's no need to make them suffer. He asks Sasaki to watch carefully, and he casts the spell. A green flash devastates the area, and Sasaki is impressed by the destruction. Peeps explains that it can also be focused on a single point, and Sasaki seems distressed by this, but Peeps assures him that he was the one who cast the spell, so he shouldn't torment himself over it. Sasaki thanks him, and they prepare to return, but a red beam heads towards them, and it breaks Peeps' barrier. The two are separated, and a girl suddenly appears. Sasaki begins to fall as Peeps and the girl fight, but he manages to cushion his fall with a spell. We see him on the ground watching, while Peeps and the girl fight in the sky, dodging each other's attacks. The girl summons an energy dragon, and Peeps counterattacks with a spinning icicle. They continue the fight, when suddenly, Sasaki sees two men coming out of the forest, and one of them is Muller. Sasaki helps them and heals the other knight. Muller introduces Sasaki as a merchant he does business with, and we learn the boy is Adonis, the second prince of the kingdom. Sasaki is surprised and bows, and Muller is impressed that he also has healing magic, but Sasaki is even more surprised that he's alive, explaining that he was reported as dead. Muller mentions that he disappeared behind enemy lines, so it isn't surprising that they thought that. They are trying to reach a nearby settlement, so they ask Sasaki for his help. Suddenly, an arrow flies towards them, but Sasaki quickly activates his barrier. He counterattacks with his lightning magic, but several knights emerge, so Muller steps forward to deal with them, and he quickly takes them down. Adonis thanks both of them, but Muller thinks he was just doing his duty. He comments on how Sasaki can use quite a number of different spells, so Sasaki explains that he had a good master, making Muller want to meet him one day. We see a village in flames, while the people are being attacked by orcs, but Sasaki appears and attacks them with his lightning, as Muller and Adonis finish the job. They continue on their way, but there are many of them, and Muller warns that they might be under the command of an elite orc, which would require a whole regiment to defeat. Muller asks the prince to stay with Sasaki, when suddenly, the elite orc arrives. It advances on them, so Sasaki uses his lightning to stop it, but it's not enough to take him down. Muller attacks the creature right after, but the orc still manages to kick him. It charges at him, but Sasaki manages to protect him. They continue on the defensive, and Muller says they need to go for the head. They prepare to attack, but something approaches from the skies, and a huge rock falls on the orcs. Peeps returns to Sasaki, apologizing for his delay, but the elite orc manages to stand up again. Peeps summons his golem, which Muller recognizes, and it quickly wipes the floor with the orc, throwing it away. Later on, Peeps explains that elites can be found in any species, including humans, since he and Sasaki could be considered as elites. They continue talking about the battle, and Muller asks about Peeps, so Sasaki introduces him as his magic teacher. Muller seems confused, so he decides to ask a question, wondering if the bird could be the Star Sage. Sasaki is surprised, but Muller explains that his spells and his way of speaking are just like the Star Sage. Peeps decides to tell the truth, and Muller kneels out of respect, and he's also happy to see Prince Adonis. Peeps shares how he crossed into another world in this form, apologizing for hiding it from them, but Muller thinks it's him who needs to apologize, since he wasn't able to do anything to protect him from the nobles. Peeps asks him to stand, and explains that the Star Sage is now dead, because he just wants to live a peaceful life with Sasaki. Sasaki explains how Peeps was the one who obtained the supplies before, and also the one who wiped out the Ogun army. They both are surprised, and Sasaki asks them to keep Peeps' matter a secret. They agree to this, which leaves Sasaki grateful, and they decide to return. They go back to the Mahler's castle, and his servants are astonished to see their lord is back. Elsa looks at them in disbelief, and runs to hug her father. Mahler apologizes for making her worry, and Sasaki is happy for them. Mark shows up and asks what's happening, but Sasaki finds it hard to explain, so he says he just ran into them, and mentions that the Ogun Empire no longer poses a threat. Mark is surprised to hear that there's no need to worry, and Sasaki explains that the army was wiped out overnight. Sebastian watches the scene in disbelief, when suddenly, the two princes appear, happy to see their father as well. Elsa can't grasp what's happening, so she collapses, and Mahler praises the boys for playing their roles well. He apologizes to Elsa for not telling her this, and they apologize for deceiving her, making her cry even more. Mahler reveals this was all part of a plan he devised. With the war and the noble squabbles escalating, his staff began acting strangely, so he spread rumors of his death to catch any traitors, while his sons also pretended to fight for succession. Sebastian can't believe it was all a plan, and the princes inform their father of how the information was leaked to Count Dietrich, who intended to take control of their lands through Elsa's marriage. Mahler confronts Sebastian about this, and he orders his guards to arrest him. Sasaki is impressed to see how strategic he is, and he can't even imagine how stressful nobility must be. Elsa thanks him for saving her father, but Sasaki feels there's no need, and Elsa runs away embarrassed. We see his neighbor Adenari at school, and she notices that she hasn't seen Sasaki for days, but he never spent more than 3 days away. As she walks back home, she keeps thinking about Sasaki, but suddenly finds a body. The police arrive and investigate the scene, asking her questions, but she overhears two men saying that the division will let Sasaki and Hashizaki handle it. Sasaki is back home, and he realizes that days have passed while he was in the other world. Normally, the time would be equivalent to 1 or 2 days, but this time it passed twice as fast, so the temporal difference between the worlds must vary. They wonder if they did something to influence this, so they review what they did in the other world. They ended the war between the kingdom and the empire, and helped in the dispute over Mahler's succession. As a reward for saving Prince Adonis, Mahler received a position in the capital and the title of Earl. The king also gave him the title of Royal Guard, and Adonis asked him to manage his personal funds. Sasaki thinks that nothing seems to be related to time distortion, which PEEPS agrees. Hashizaki arrives at his house, and tells him he should leave a note if he's going to disappear. On their way to their mission, Hashizaki informs him that they are going to recruit a psychic. He's a high school student, and they received reports of supernatural phenomena around him. Hashizaki thinks that today's kids only cause trouble, but Sasaki reminds her that he's the same age as her, but Hashizaki considers herself mentally mature. The reports indicate the boy has the power to control fire. There have been no reports of fire incidents at school, so he has been using his power only within his neighborhood. Sasaki wonders if they should investigate more, but Hashizaki doesn't see the need, since the boy is at the same level as Sasaki, so they should be enough to handle him. Sasaki understands, but reminds her how they had trouble last time, so Hashizaki mentions that they have permission to use firearms in the worst-case scenario. At the boys' school, Hashizaki speaks with the principal, and says that they came to observe the educational situation in the area. Hashizaki spots the boy they're looking for, but he just looks like an ordinary student to Sasaki. Hashizaki warns him not to let his guard down, so they follow the boy and notice other students bullying him. Hashizaki tries to intervene, but Sasaki stops her. Hashizaki thinks he might use his powers, but Sasaki points out that the bullying has been going on for a while, and there haven't been cases of the boy using his power at school, so he's been able to endure it. Sasaki suggests making contact when he's alone, wanting to avoid intervening in a way that might hurt the boy's self-esteem, since they might end up working together in the future. Suddenly, Hashizaki comes up with her own plan, so she asks Sasaki to leave the negotiations to her while he writes the report. Sasaki understands, and we see him in a cafe. He remembers how he used to eat a snack from the convenience store around this time, but now he's having a fancy coffee, realizing that no one ever knows what will happen in life. He has some free time and thinks about picking up something nice for PEEPS, but he notices the boy with a girl and he follows them. He thinks that the girl might be his girlfriend, wondering where Hashizaki is, but he thinks the girl looks familiar. He decides to leave, but the bullies show up. They didn't know the boy had a girlfriend, and they ask if she wants to hang out with them instead. The boy tries to protect her, and one of the bullies touches her, but she suddenly slaps him. The bully tries to retaliate, and the boy uses his power, but his fire shoots up and ends up hitting a plane. The debris falls, so Sasaki raises a barrier to protect them. He asks the girl if she's okay, but she wonders what Sasaki is doing, while he realizes it's Hashizaki, and he didn't expect she could act so convincingly. Hashizaki explains that this was the best way to recruit him, and wonders if the barrier is from Sasaki, but he pretends he doesn't know. Hashizaki decides to cover everything up, and Sasaki makes some ice for her, which she uses to put everyone to sleep. She thinks that if the barrier was from another psychic, they should have approached them by now, so she wonders if Sasaki is a magical girl. Sasaki doesn't understand what she means, and Hashizaki thinks that all magical girls so far have been young girls. She explains that there are 7 magical girls in the world, who have all acquired strange magical powers and caused unexplainable phenomena. She warns that one of them is Japanese and has been killing psychics. Hashizaki mentions that their priority is to hide the barrier, but suddenly, the strange girl from before attacks the barrier. Hashizaki warns Sasaki that they need to leave, and the girl recognizes him. Hashizaki wonders how Sasaki knows her, and he tells her that he saw her on the streets near his apartment. The girl asks if he's a psychic, but he denies it, realizing that she's a magical girl. The girl reveals she saw the pillar of fire, and her attack was also blocked by the barrier, so there must be 2 psychics there. Sasaki asks if she has a problem with psychics, and she says that she intends to kill them. Sasaki wonders if she lives nearby, so she mentions that there's a supermarket that throws out food nearby, so she shows up there sometimes. She asks Sasaki why he is here, so he mentions it's his duty, indicating that he's a police officer. Sasaki thinks it's best to speak with her alone, when the psychic girl from before appears, and Hashizaki recognizes her as Shizuka Futari. Shizuka explains she can help, but the girl asks if she's a psychic, and when she says maybe, the girl attacks her. Shizuka manages to dodge, but hits Sasaki's barrier. Hashizaki attacks with her water, and Shizuka dodges, but one of them manages to hit, but she's able to heal instantly. Hashizaki attacks again, but she ends up getting knocked out with just a touch. Shizuka thinks things will be easier for Sasaki now, and he asks her why she's doing this, so she explains she has a favor to ask. The magical girl asks if Sasaki knows the psychic, so he gets worried, and decides to work together with Shizuka for now. He explains that he'll distract her, so she can find an opportunity to attack without killing the girl. Sasaki advances while blocking the girl's attack, so she thinks he must be a psychic. Sasaki asserts that he's not, because he used magic, so he's a magical man. The girl asks if a fairy also asked for his help, but Shizuka attacks her from behind. However, the girl is able to stop her, blowing her away. Sasaki tries to learn about the fairy who asked for her help, but the girl mentions that she killed them, showing off a scarf made from their fur, saying she never wanted to be a magical girl, so she killed them. Sasaki realizes that the girl can use magic without incantations, while he explains that he needs incantations to use his magic. The girl accepts that Sasaki is a magical man, but wonders why he is working with a psychic, asking if she can kill her. Sasaki wonders why she hates psychics, and he learns that psychics killed her family. The girl notices a young boy on the ground, so she suddenly decides to leave using her portal. Hashizaki and the boy rest in a hotel, while Sasaki thanks Shizuka for her help. He asks about her favor, so she mentions she wants to be recruited. Sasaki explains that he doesn't have the authority to make that call, so Shizuka asks to speak with his superior, while Sasaki wonders why she wants this. Shizuka says that she's interested in him, but he insists that he is just an ordinary man. Shizuka recalls all his various abilities, so she believes he's hiding this power from the department, and Sasaki realizes she has seen through him. He tries to pretend, but Shizuka says she will keep it between them if he helps her out. Suddenly, Akutsu calls Sasaki and asks what he's doing. Sasaki explains that they had an encounter with a magical girl, but managed to escape. Akutsu inquires about the fireball, so Sasaki says that the boy was using his power to defend himself against the girl. He also mentions that he just received a job offer from Shizuka, and Akutsu agrees to arrange an interview for her. Hashizaki wakes up, but she remains quiet and listens to the conversation. Sasaki warns that Akutsu might install cameras in her house if she is accepted, and she should find the right moment to get rid of them. Hashizaki gets up in shock and asks if it's true, as Sasaki wonders if she overheard them talking about his powers, but she asks if Akutsu really installs cameras in their houses, so Sasaki is relieved. Hashizaki wants to return to the department, and Sasaki notices there's a store on the first floor, so he decides to stop by. He looks at the pickled plum, and Shizuka compliments him on his fine taste. He explains that he thinks it makes meat more tender, but Shizuka thinks he doesn't know much about plums. Outside the bureau, Hashizaki points out how close Sasaki has gotten with Shizuka, looking at the gift she gave. Sasaki explains that it's a real pickled plum and is from a stash she pickled for years. Hashizaki asks if he realizes the danger she represents, and we learn she's an A-rank psychic. Her ability is to drain energy, and she can suck life energy with just a touch, which gives her incredible regenerative ability, and she's over 100 years old. They meet Akutsu, and he explains that the boy is being taken care of, but Hashizaki asks about the cameras he's installed in their houses, thinking it's harassment. Akutsu reveals that he doesn't swing that way, and that the cameras have identified many spies. Hashizaki understands, but demands the cameras out of her house. Akutsu asks what Sasaki is carrying, so he explains that it's pickled plum, inviting him to try one, and when he tries it, he is pleasantly surprised. Hashizaki tries it as well, but finds it too sour. Sasaki returns to his apartment, but encounters Shizuka on the way, asking to stay at his place for the night. Sasaki wants to refuse, but Shizuka shows him a recorder and a thermal camera, revealing that she was spying on him and saw PEEPS talking in front of the computer. She's heard that messengers from the fairy world can possess beasts when visiting them, but when Sasaki asks what she's talking about, she threatens to hand the memory card to his superior. Sasaki gets tense, but she assures him she was just joking and thinks Sasaki isn't protecting himself very well. She explains that psychics are not well received by magical girls, so he should be more careful. We learn Shizuka is being targeted by her former organization, so she needs a new ally. Sasaki understands her situation, but thinks accepting it is risky. Shizuka notes that she has accumulated a great fortune in her life, so they can make a deal with that. Sasaki finds the idea tempting, since he has been spending a lot on stocking up on items. He admits he would accept depending on the amount, but he can't make the decision alone, so he asks for time to discuss things, as she complains she can't stay on the streets at night. The next day, PEEPS meets with Shizuka, and he inquires how much she would be willing to offer. We learn Sasaki and PEEPS discussed everything the night before, and PEEPS was convinced by the promise of expensive food. PEEPS asks if she can pay with something other than money, pointing out that she may have connections to buy and sell valuable items. Shizuka doesn't mind this, and Sasaki mentions that he'd like to avoid trouble at work. Shizuka understands, and imagines they have something from the fairy world that they'd like to sell. PEEPS confirms this, explaining that they want to sell valuable metals. Sasaki realizes the problem was converting the values of money from the other world into yen, but now they could solve this with Shizuka's contacts. She seems interested, but explains she can't decide before seeing the merchandise. PEEPS decides to prepare it, and Sasaki notes it's time for the interview. Akutsu arrives and asks if she really plans to work for the department. Shizuka confirms this, so Akutsu asks her to convince him, since she's still an officer from a hostile organization. He warns that even as a skilled psychic, it wouldn't be possible to accept her as an official employee at the moment, but Shizuka says she would be grateful if he just allowed her to assist with the work, and she notes she's fine with contract work, as long as she can operate under the department's name, just wanting to secure proof of affiliation. Akutsu considers this, and decides Sasaki will supervise her, leaving him surprised. He tells Akutsu he's still a recruit, but Akutsu mentions he promotes good employees regardless of time. Sasaki tries to say he doesn't have authority, and Akutsu grants him the same level of authority as Hashizaki, leaving Shizuka in his care. The two celebrate Shizuka's acceptance into the department by having a couple of drinks. Shizuka asked if he liked the plum she gave him, but Sasaki says he hasn't tried it yet. He notes that he shared it with everyone, and he was able to see a rare side of people. He thanks her for the gift, and Shizuka seems to understand why his boss trusts him so much, seeing him as an honest person. Sasaki says that even though she's just a temporary employee, he asks her to do her best, so her former companions might also join the organization. But Shizuka has another idea, and she prefers to be in an intimate relationship and spread spicy rumors around the department. Sasaki is shocked, but he still needs her help to sell items from the other world. She begins to ask about the magical girls, but Hashizaki shows up. She heard that Sasaki was put in charge of Shizuka, and asks what he's doing. Sasaki explains that Akutsu ordered them to do this, and he asks if she wants to eat with them, so she joins them. After he uses the bathroom, Hashizaki wants to talk to him, but Sasaki also has something to say. He heard that her power is to manipulate liquid, and asks if that includes bodily fluids. Hashizaki explains that she can do it if she touches the liquid outside the body, but she can't control it when it's under the skin. Sasaki thinks it would have been effective against Shizuka, and Hashizaki thanks Sasaki for saving her. Sasaki covered for her, so she can continue doing her job, and she gives him some homemade eggs as a thank you. She remembers Sasaki said he liked preserved foods but couldn't stand sour things, so she wrapped the plums with eggs so he can enjoy a milder flavor. Sasaki thanks her, and she looks embarrassed while saying he can eat them at home if he prefers, but Sasaki eats it straight away, and he finds it delicious. Hashizaki is happy to hear this, but doesn't like seeing Shizuka eating the eggs with him. Shizuka says their destinies are linked, wondering if she's jealous. Hashizaki gets uncomfortable seeing them so close, but denies being jealous. Back in the other world, the king summons the nobles, as he thinks about their conflict with the empire, causing him to despair over their future, and he wants to ensure that the kingdom remains prosperous. So he proclaims a new policy, saying all of his successors shall have equal influence in state affairs, and the one with the greatest contribution after 5 years will be named as the heir to the throne. We cut to Mark, as his companion mentions that his business is doing well, saying everyone is talking about him. But at that moment, a carriage charges at them, and they're able to avoid it, but a man reprimands them for hitting Count Dietrich's carriage. Mark's companion looks at the carriage, and he wonders why a man named Herman is inside. We see Sasaki checking his goods, as he prepares to sell them to Mark, but as he's about to leave, he encounters the maid, who informs him that he has a message from Mahler. He heads to Mahler's mansion, where the guard formally greets him, but he finds this weird, because he recalls that the guard was casual during their last interaction. Mahler meets Sasaki and PEEPS, informing them about the king's new policy, which caused the successors to fight over the throne. PEEPS knows that the king is thinking about the royal family, because they're going to lose influence if the kingdom is invaded, but he thinks the move is too sudden. Mahler mentions that the nobles are supporting different successors, causing them to become divided, and the kingdom is currently in chaos, so he advises Sasaki to leave the kingdom for his safety. He's surprised to hear this, because he never had a boss that cares for his safety, but he tells Mahler that he will stay in the city, saying he wishes to keep doing business there. At that moment, a servant enters the room, informing them that a messenger from Herman's company has arrived, and Mahler wants to meet him. The messenger informs them that Mark has been imprisoned for insulting Dietrich, but he mentions that Mark did nothing wrong, thinking it's a setup. He explains the incident, and Sasaki thinks that it was orchestrated by Herman. We learn that Mark is the vice manager of Herman's company, and he's an extremely successful businessman. Herman is the manager of the company, and he was trying to open a new branch with the support of Dietrich, but he became jealous of Mark's success, seeing him as a threat. Dietrich knows that he's connected to Mahler, who happens to be Dietrich's enemy, so he decided to help Herman get rid of Mark. Sasaki decides to visit Mark, and Mahler gives him a knife, saying he can use it to act as his representative. Sasaki rides a carriage, as he notes that Dietrich is taking advantage of Herman's jealousy, and he wonders how they should resolve the issue. PEEPS offers to help him with magic, but he wants to save Mark using his method, saying he wants to do it in the most peaceful way possible. Sasaki enters the prison, and the guard escorts him to Mark, who wonders what he's doing there. He notes that Mark is in terrible condition, so he uses magic to heal him, and he explains that he knows what happened, saying he wants to prove that Mark is innocent. He tells the guard to pass a message to Dietrich, saying he should work with Mark instead of Herman, because he can make more profits with Mark. The guard agrees to do it, but he thinks the proposal is ridiculous because Mark is working with Dietrich's enemy. But Sasaki explains that he doesn't care about the prince and he just wants Mark to be released, claiming Dietrich will benefit from the proposal. Sasaki meets the merchant of the Kepler company named Joseph, saying he wants to establish a company in the city and he's looking for investors. He claims that Joseph will benefit if Kepler invests in the company, as he shows Joseph his products, saying he will sell it to the company so that a brand identity will be established. He offers to sell his products to Kepler, saying they can defer payment until the company has been established, and Joseph agrees to work with him. After the meeting, Sasaki looks for something he can sell for profit in his own world, and PEEPS tells him that he should invest in gold, because the other world has more gold in circulation. He thinks this is a great idea, so PEEPS tells him that they should collect gold bars and sell them in his world for profit. So he decides to return to Muller's city and prepare the crates for storage, telling PEEPS to collect the gold bars. Sasaki arrives in the city, waiting for PEEPS to return, as the maid informs him that he has a visitor. Elsa approaches him, asking him about Mark, so he mentions that they're trying to save him because he's considered as an important citizen. She's worried about him, and Sasaki notes that she has a kind soul, telling her to remain calm because Mark will return home safely. PEEPS suddenly appears, and he starts talking to Sasaki, but he panics, realizing that Elsa heard him. So he starts flying around, pretending to be an ordinary bird, but she knows that he talked, so she demands an explanation. They realize that there's no way around it, so they decide to tell her the truth, as Sasaki explains that PEEPS is a special breed, which can speak to humans and use magic. He explains that PEEPS has been targeted by thieves, so they should keep the information private, as Sasaki mentions that Muller is the only one who knows the truth. Elsa agrees to keep it a secret, and they part ways, as Sasaki stores the gold bars in his crates. Moments later, the maid informs him that French has arrived to visit him, so he leaves to talk to him. That evening, PEEPS uses his spell, returning them to Sasaki's world, where Sasaki meets Shizuka, showing her the crates. She opens it, but she realizes that there's a girl inside, and Sasaki is surprised to see Elsa, realizing she has snuck over to his world. We see people searching for Elsa, and Muller wonders where she is. In the warehouse, Shizuka is surprised to find that there are humans living in the fairy world. She looks at her, and Elsa asks Sasaki who she is. Sasaki asks to talk with Elsa in private, but Shizuka wants to hear what she has to say. Sasaki thinks about what he can say in front of Shizuka, because she could find out he lied to her. He needs to hide the other world from her, but he can't think of a good excuse, so PEEPS reveals that Shizuka can't understand his language. He explains that his magic translates his words when he's in the other world, and does the same for Sasaki to understand them, so they won't be able to understand each other. He asks Elsa to explain herself, but she confronts him. Mark was captured on the day Sasaki visited them, and after his talk about saving Mark, she saw him secretly transporting gold, so she thought it was payment for selling Mark to Dietrich. Sasaki understands her, but tells her that she's wrong, and that the gold is part of his plan to save Mark. Elsa doesn't believe him, but Sasaki explains that he saved money through his business, and will use it to make a deal with Shizuka, so the profits will change Mark's situation, but the deal might fail because she showed up. Elsa feels bad about it, and Sasaki declares that he would never betray her father or abandon Mark. She starts to think, and Shizuka tries to attack Elsa, but PEEPS saves her. Shizuka gets pinned, and PEEPS asks what she's doing. Elsa is scared, but Shizuka explains that there was a bug on her shoulder, and PEEPS decides to put a curse on her to make her obedient to them. The wind stops, and Shizuka tries to retaliate, but can't, so PEEPS places the curse on her. A mark appears on her hand, and PEEPS explains that the mark grows if she shows hostility towards them, and when it spreads over her entire body, she'll be reduced to just a mass of flesh. Her powers won't be able to save her, so he suggests she live a life without bad intentions towards them, or else she'll be trapped in a powerless body. Shizuka tries to attack Sasaki, but he uses his barrier, and the mark begins to spread. Shizuka stops her attempt, and confesses that she wanted to take the chance to have a magic user under her control, but she admits defeat. Sasaki tells Elsa that this is a dangerous place, so she should go back. Elsa still has many questions, and Sasaki says he'll answer everything when she returns home, but Elsa wants to know now and demands an explanation. Sasaki knows that their relationship with her will affect his relationship with Muller, so he thinks he needs to be honest and asks her to go on a walk. We see Sasaki and Elsa on a ferry, and he shows Tokyo to her. Elsa is surprised to see Sasaki's hometown, and he wonders if she'll believe him now. Elsa states she has no choice, since there is no place like this in the kingdom or the neighboring countries. Elsa wonders what Sasaki wants from her world if he lives in such a prosperous one, so Sasaki says he wants a harmonious relationship between them, but it's also because of the food. Shizuka asks to be included in the conversation, because she arranged the ferry and the clothes. Sasaki explains that she was complimenting her kimono, and this makes Shizuka happy, so she wonders if Elsa would like one as well. They continue to show the city to Elsa and take a break to eat. They notice reporters nearby and decide to leave the place, but the reporter runs to talk to Elsa. Sasaki says they aren't interested, so the reporters move on to another spot. But a kid gets excited about the reporters and falls, so Elsa saves him using magic. Sasaki asks Shizuka to help them cover, so she uses her powers to take them down. Elsa wonders what's happening, but Sasaki decides to get out of there first. They start to run, and Sasaki worries about the bureau finding out about Elsa, but the bureau shows up, and they realize they were already being watched. They are taken to the bureau, where the group meets with Akutsu. He asks if Sasaki managed to find another psychic, but Sasaki mentions she's just a friend of Shizuka. Akutsu tries to speak with Elsa, but Sasaki mentions she speaks a different language, and he was just accompanying Shizuka. Akutsu respects the circumstances, and decides not to ask further about Elsa. Shizuka apologizes for the trouble, and Akutsu reveals that he has a question for her as his contractor. Akutsu mentions a B-ranked psychic with telekinesis in her former organization, and he asks her to neutralize him. Shizuka wonders if this is a test for her official admission, but Akutsu tells her she's free to think of it however she wants. Sasaki finds this request terrifying, and Akutsu declares that he'll be her supporter. She thinks he'll be useful, and Akutsu clarifies that there's no deadline, but asks her to do it as soon as possible, and Shizuka declares that she'll return with his head, while Sasaki wonders why he was dragged into this. Afterwards, Sasaki is having tea, and Elsa reveals that she wants to learn more about his world. She wants to take their knowledge to her world, thinking it could be useful to her father, but Sasaki apologizes and says that he can't allow it. Elsa gets irritated and thinks it shouldn't be so difficult to shelter a girl, but Sasaki thinks otherwise. He explains that they all have unique identification numbers, and every place is heavily monitored, so she could easily end up in prison, and he wouldn't be able to face her father. Elsa thinks that if his world ever attacked them, they would be completely crushed, so she wants to do something about it, but Sasaki thinks her world isn't as weak as she believes. PEEPS agrees with him, because most weapons use heat or impact in this world, and require time and money, so if they use monsters that are not affected by physical impacts or heat, it would be easy to retaliate. Sasaki doesn't seem well upon hearing this, but Elsa is cheered by his expression, and thinks he deserves it because he does nothing but scold her all day. Elsa thinks her father must be worried about her, but PEEPS thinks it's normal for a father to worry about his daughter, and says he'll explain everything to Muller. PEEPS thinks that another hour won't make a difference, and suggests learning more about this world. We see PEEPS teaching her about samurai movies, and Shizuka arrives. She tells Sasaki that she'll pay what they agreed on for his merchandise, and asks how he would like to receive the payment. Sasaki wonders if he can receive a portion in the form of items, and Shizuka agrees to this, so he thinks he'll be able to free Mark soon. He tells Elsa it's time to go, and he takes her back to the other world. We see French bringing food to Mark, and he uses Muller's knife to get into the prison, because Sasaki asked him to cheer up Mark with his cooking. French gives him the lunch, and Mark thanks him for his care. At the Viscount's mansion, Elsa apologizes to her father, and he's happy that she's alive. Sasaki asks about Mark, but Muller hasn't made any progress. A maid announces that they have a visitor, and Elsa tries to listen to them from the outside. Her brother Kai appears, wondering what she's doing, but he tells her not to go missing again. We learn that the visitor is Herman. He wants to talk about Mark, and apologizes for the trouble Mark got into. Muller says he'll find a way to save Mark, but Herman tells them that Dietrich has decided to execute him. Muller guarantees that he won't let it happen, but Herman thinks there's nothing that can be done and asks them to let Mark pay for what he did while smiling. He leaves, and Peeps thinks it was a bad act. Mahler decides to talk to Dietrich, and he plans to use money to buy more time, so Peeps thinks it's better than nothing. Sasaki thinks about the relationship between Count Dietrich and Herman and asks Mahler if it wasn't Dietrich who tried to use Sebastian to take over his house. Mahler says that Dietrich is an excellent ruler, since he's the best at dealing with internal affairs, but he's ruthless in achieving his goals. For better or worse, he's good at controlling things in his favor, so Sasaki thinks he's like a kutsu. Mahler reveals that they have been rivals for generations, and have even fought over territories before, so he must want to take the company and damage his assets, and Sasaki asks to accompany him to the meeting. In the carriage, Peeps wonders why Sasaki wants to meet Dietrich, so he says it's hard to know someone without meeting them. Peeps thinks he likes the roundabout approach to solve problems, but Sasaki explains that he doesn't have the power to resolve everything as quickly as him. Peeps wonders what he's holding, and Sasaki explains that it's a gift. They arrive at Dietrich's mansion, and Sasaki notices someone leaving. They meet with Dietrich, but he states that the matter has already been decided, and there's nothing that can be done. Sasaki thinks Dietrich has an intense aura, and Dietrich wonders who Sasaki is, so he introduces himself as a merchant. Dietrich remembers that he helped Prince Adonis return and praises his service. Sasaki gives his gift, explaining that it's one of his goods, and it allows for long-distance communication. Dietrich is impressed with the item, and he asks about Sasaki's other items. Sasaki explains that his goods are sold by the Herman Trading Company, and Mahler also buys his products. Dietrich thinks about this, and asks if he also wants to beg for a criminal's life, but Sasaki explains that Mark helped him start his business. So Dietrich makes a proposal that if Sasaki sells all his merchandise to him, then he'll free Mark. Mahler is angry since he shouldn't make Sasaki bear this responsibility, so Dietrich thinks that Mark should just be executed as planned. Sasaki asks for time to think about it, so Dietrich agrees to postpone the execution for a month, hoping he'll make the right decision. Afterwards, Mahler apologizes for dragging him into this, but Sasaki claims that Mark's life is more important than his business. French comes running towards them and is desperate about Mark's execution. He asks if there's anything they can do, and Sasaki asks Mahler to give him a couple weeks. Mahler doesn't mind, and he wonders if Sasaki has a plan, so he explains that he intends to use everything to his advantage and makes a request to Mahler. Mahler leaves, and Peeps wonders what he's planning, saying he could just intervene. Sasaki decides to save that as a last resort, but asks for his help with a task that involves flying, and he agrees in exchange for some Kobe beef. We see Dietrich talking to Herman, and he wonders why he delayed Mark's sentence, but Dietrich explains they are waiting to see if Sasaki accepts his terms. He thinks about how lucky he is to have the Herman Trading Company and Sasaki by his side, and this will help the first prince take the throne. We see Sasaki moving some of his goods, and Peeps jokes that his plan is to skip town. He wonders why Sasaki packed up his stash, and Sasaki explains that he needs money, and asks if he can take him to see Joseph. They see Joseph, and the items are used as collateral to establish a new trading company. Sasaki mentions that he'll bring another batch in the next few days, and it will be twice the size of this one, wanting to be paid in cash on that day. Joseph thinks it won't be a problem, and a man named Matisse appears. Joseph finds his visit unexpected, but he says he had business nearby and decided to stop by. Joseph introduces him to Sasaki, and mentions that Matisse is a friend from his school days who now works at the central bank. Sasaki bows in respect, and thinks he looks familiar. Joseph wonders about the reason for his visit, so Matisse says he wants some advice. He's in charge of the south, and explains that a noble from the kingdom has taken out a loan, but the empire's retreat appears to have disrupted his plans, and Sasaki remembers that Matisse was the man from Dietrich's estate, so he asks to join in the conversation. Back in Sasaki's world, Ananari wonders if Sasaki is working late again. She hears something inside his apartment, and wonders when he came back. She hears his voice, and wonders who he's talking to. Sasaki comes out and catches her, so she gets nervous and asks if he's leaving. He explains that he left something at work, so he says goodbye to her. He gets a call from Shizuka, and she asks where he is. She scolds him for making her wait for 3 hours, so he realizes it's already 10 p.m. and wonders if the time changed again. He apologizes to her and asks if she made it. She says she isn't a delivery service, but confirms that she got everything and wants him to come get it quickly, so Sasaki says he's on his way. We see Elsa worried about her father, so Kai assures her that he'll be fine, and their brother is with him too, but he admits he's worried about Sasaki's abilities, while Elsa tells him that Sasaki is more capable than him. The carriage arrives, and Muller appears with Maximilian. Elsa gets excited and asks him how things went, and it seems it went well. Hermann meets with Dietrich, and Hermann is happy that today is the deadline. They haven't heard from Sasaki, so they think he must have turned down Dietrich's offer. He laughs about it, but Dietrich tells him they should wait. He asks about the loan Hermann took out from the central bank. Hermann gets nervous, but explains it was for a branch transfer. Dietrich finds the amount excessive and hopes he has the means to pay it back. An employee brings in a letter, and Dietrich seems pleased after reading it. French appears nervous, but Sasaki tells him to act normally. Dietrich arrives, bringing Mark with him, and he wonders why Sasaki chose this place, so Sasaki explains that he owns the restaurant and wants to discuss the deal over a meal. He introduces French as the chef and asks about Mark, so Dietrich explains he's in the carriage. He'll release him if they come to an agreement, but if they don't, the carriage will head to the execution site. Dietrich wonders where Muller is, but he arrives soon after, and he brings Prince Adonis, so Dietrich is surprised and doesn't seem happy about it. They sit to discuss, and Sasaki asks French to prepare the food. Dietrich asks Adonis why he's there, so he explains that Sasaki serves interesting dishes, and thought it would be a good opportunity to get to know each other better. He asks Dietrich to be less formal, and he wants to speak openly about the future of the kingdom, so they eat and discuss the kingdom. Muller agrees with some of Dietrich's ideas, while Adonis recognizes he is as wise as the rumors suggest, and thanks both for their opinions. Dietrich also praises Adonis's bravery, and is honored to have this conversation with him. Adonis thanks him for the compliment, and he's surprised to be praised by someone who supports his brother, but Dietrich explains that he deeply respects the royal family. So Adonis decides to talk about another matter, and he asks Dietrich to release Mark. Dietrich is surprised, so Adonis explains that Sasaki and Muller can give him any compensation he wants for the offenses Mark committed, and they both confirm this. So Dietrich explains that he has already given his conditions to resolve the matter, and wants Sasaki to sell his products directly to him. Adonis can't accept this, and Dietrich wonders why, so Sasaki explains that he sells his products under Adonis's discretion. Adonis is interested in his products, and he asked him to sell only to those he can trust, so that's why he only sells through the Hermann Trading Company and to Muller, who serves Adonis. He thinks changing this agreement at the request of another person would be disrespectful to Adonis and a crime against royalty, so he asks for another price for Mark's offenses. Dietrich accepts his request, but Hermann tries to protest that it isn't their deal, so Dietrich reminds him to be respectful in the presence of the prince. Dietrich starts thinking of another form of compensation, and explains that Mark greatly offended his noble pride, so he asks for 1,000 large gold coins. Adonis is astonished by the amount, and Muller thinks it's too much for a commoner, but Dietrich explains that the amount isn't for Mark's life, but for his dignity. He reminds them that peerage is a duty bestowed by the king, and even putting a price on it is an insult. So Sasaki agrees to give 1,000 large coins, and Dietrich can't believe he can pay the amount. Dietrich explains that the payment can't be made over the years, and wants it paid within the year, but Sasaki tells him that that's his intention. Muller gets worried, and Adonis states that lying in this situation would be unacceptable, but Sasaki calms them down. He intends to deliver half the payment now as a down payment, and they can sell the rest in the following week. Dietrich thinks it's absurd, and doesn't think it's possible for him to pay that much, even as a knight in Adonis's service, but Sasaki asks him to calm down, and assures him that Mark's life is worth every coin. He explains that Mark will bring a lot of wealth to him in the kingdom, and the wealth he'll help create will be crucial against future attacks from other countries, so 1,000 large coins is a small price to pay for the kingdom's economic health. He promises to pay the full amount, and he asks Dietrich to release Mark. Dietrich wonders why a foreigner is so concerned about the kingdom, so Sasaki explains that it's the home of a friend, and he wouldn't like to see it destroyed. Adonis praises Sasaki's words, and Dietrich declares he will choose to believe in Sasaki, realizing that as a noble, it's also his duty to be concerned for the kingdom. So he renounces the payment and decides to release Mark. Sasaki wonders if he's sure, and Dietrich explains that he's showing consideration for Prince Adonis, and if Mark is that important, he'll be looking forward to see what he will do. But Herman protests, saying that wasn't what they agreed upon, but Dietrich refuses to change his decision, so Herman explains he has other means, and says he will report this to the high-ranking nobles of the First Prince's faction, starting with the Marquis coach, warning that it might have an impact on Dietrich's reputation. Dietrich becomes furious, and French appears to report that a man has arrived, and we see that it's Joseph. Sasaki wonders what he is doing in the kingdom, and he explains that he was passing by to do business. Muller wonders who he is, so Sasaki introduces him as the head of the Kepler Trading Company. They are surprised to hear this, so Muller introduces himself and apologizes for not receiving him properly. Adonis also introduces himself, and says it's an honor to meet him. Sasaki discovers that the Kepler Trading Company is a major business in this world, and the power of the Republic of Lunge is superior to that of the kingdom, so it's important for the kingdom to meet someone like Joseph. Dietrich and Herman also introduce themselves, and after hearing their names, Joseph wonders if Sasaki was able to resolve his problem. Sasaki wonders what he means, and an employee of Herman reports that the bonds of his company were bought. Sasaki thinks Joseph is behind this, so Joseph explains that he thought Sasaki was having trouble with the count, so he took the liberty and bought the bonds that represent the loan Dietrich took during the war, wanting to aid in Sasaki's negotiations, thinking it would help establish the Mark Trading Company. But Muller wonders what the Mark Trading Company is. Sasaki was hoping to announce it after everything was resolved, but he reveals he has been working to create a new trading company in Lunge to sell his items, which would be managed by Mark, and explains that it would bring profit to the kingdom. Dietrich and Herman can't believe what they're hearing, while Joseph asks to meet Mark. Dietrich releases Mark, and he thanks Sasaki for all his efforts, while Sasaki welcomes him back. He's introduced to Joseph, and he has high hopes for their future business. Sasaki thinks Joseph is even more impressive than he thought, and hopes he never becomes an enemy. After that, Sasaki and PEEPS have a moment alone, and PEEPS praises him. He wonders how Sasaki knew he would win, but Sasaki admits he didn't, so he created several plans. He first requested help from Adonis, since the kingdom values hierarchy, and the prince's words would have an effect on Dietrich. Sasaki notes he anticipated Dietrich would impose a new condition, likely involving money, because he discovered Dietrich had incurred a debt during the war. He also asked Joseph to investigate this, and he found out Dietrich had a number of promissory notes in his name. So he spoke with Shizuka to secure the funds, and he planned to buy Dietrich's bonds and use them in the negotiation, but Joseph was faster and did it first. PEEPS is impressed by his foresight, and Sasaki suggests they enjoy some Kobe beef when they get home. PEEPS thinks he doesn't deserve it since he didn't do anything, but Sasaki says it's to celebrate their victory, so PEEPS agrees, and they head back. Sasaki returns to his apartment, and he gets a call from Shizuka, asking for his help. He goes to her apartment, but the place is completely destroyed. A squad appears and shoots at him, but PEEPS protects him with a barrier. He thanks PEEPS and starts looking for Shizuka, and he finds her hiding. She thanks him for coming, and he heals her wound, while Shizuka thinks his powers are amazing. Sasaki asks her to not tell the bureau about it, so she shows him the curse mark as proof of her loyalty. The squad continues to shoot at them, and we discover that they were sent by her former organization, which is trying to silence her. PEEPS wonders what they want to do, and Shizuka explains that the target that Akutsu gave her is among them, so she doesn't want to miss this chance. Shizuka realizes that she still doesn't know what their goals are, but they still can't talk about it. PEEPS decides to take care of the situation, and Sasaki finds it cute when he's determined. Another man suddenly appears, and Shizuka is terrified because she knows they are no match for him, revealing that he's the leader of her former organization. PEEPS wonders what ability he has, and she reveals that he can give physical form to his imagination, so his ability has infinite possibilities. The man wonders who Sasaki is, and Shizuka jokes that he's her new sugar daddy. The man wants her to return to the organization, but when she refuses, he decides that he'll need to eliminate her. He uses his power and summons a copy of Shizuka, and Sasaki wonders if the copy can also use her powers. Shizuka asks for his help to escape, and Sasaki realizes that her copy can keep reappearing if they fight her, so he asks PEEPS for help. PEEPS agrees, and the leader realizes that he can talk, so he thinks Sasaki's ability has to do with familiars, thinking it's a funny ability. PEEPS decides it's time to go, so Shizuka says goodbye as they teleport. They go to the warehouse, and Shizuka thanks them for the help. She's surprised they seem to know her moves, and Sasaki thinks that the only people who know about her mission are him and the bureau. PEEPS wants to learn about the man's ability, so Shizuka explains that he can't replicate any natural phenomena. She realizes that this complicates the request from the bureau, so she has a proposal for Sasaki. She decides to help with all future transactions, in exchange for help to join the bureau. PEEPS thinks she's not in a position to make requests, reminding her of the curse, but Sasaki wants to resolve this in another way. He explains that she was at fault when she attacked Elsa, but thinks it's important to remain equals in future negotiations. Sasaki asks to hear her plan, but suddenly, her former boss appears, using another copy as his transport. Sasaki wonders how he knew they were there, so he tells him that a friend told him. Sasaki is surprised, since he didn't expect him to be working with the bureau, and he explains that they're not the only ones who can work with the state. Sasaki thinks this is something Akutsu would do, and they have probably been monitoring him since the incident with Elsa. He tells PEEPS to get them out, but the guy suddenly throws grenades at them, so PEEPS acts and uses barriers to avoid the explosion. Sasaki wonders how he knew they were explosives, and PEEPS thanks the internet. He wonders if he can kill the man, and Shizuka thinks it would be great. So he tells them to watch from a distance and prepares for battle. The man concludes that Sasaki uses a familiar for attack and defense, so he starts reciting an enchantment and conjures lava to attack them, but PEEPS manages to defend. Sasaki also finds PEEPS fighting cute, and he asks Shizuka about when she said that he couldn't summon natural phenomena. Shizuka seems to recognize the attack, and thinks it's from a video game she used to play. Sasaki also knows the game, and remembers that it needs a ring equipped to cast the spell. He notices the boss wearing the ring, so what he materialized wasn't the spell itself, but the equipment that allows him to use it. Sasaki realizes that he can materialize things that aren't real, and thinks that Shizuka's friends didn't trust her enough to tell her that, but she scolds him for being rude. The boss creates a bigger spell, so Sasaki uses his barrier, but PEEPS cancels out the fireball. The boss is shocked, wondering what kind of familiar PEEPS is, and PEEPS decides that it's his turn and casts his own fire spell. But the boss materializes another ring and creates a barrier. He realizes he can't go easy, so he summons a sword. Shizuka thinks it's also from a game she used to play, and it's a sword that can erase anything from existence. Sasaki doesn't think this sounds good, so he warns PEEPS to not let the blade touch him, and the boss tells them to stop revealing spoilers during the fight, but Shizuka says that it's his fault for thinking of popular games. PEEPS gets even more interested in his ability, but this annoys him, so he attacks, but PEEPS manages to block it. He suddenly conjures someone to attack PEEPS from behind, and he manages to cut his wing. Sasaki can't believe what's happening, but PEEPS tells him not to worry, as the copy starts to disappear. The boss realizes that PEEPS used a kind of reverberation, and reflected the effect of his attack, so he thinks PEEPS is cheating, and wonders how he can have so many powers. PEEPS says that it's his job to find out, but the boss thinks it doesn't make sense. PEEPS heals his wing, surprising the boss yet again, and he gives up on fighting. He decides to let Shizuka go, and he doesn't want to risk his life for this. Sasaki is relieved, and wants to talk to him. Sasaki asks for a favor, and wonders if he can make it clear to the bureau that Shizuka left his organization. He agrees to do this, and Sasaki also mentions that his abilities aren't known to the bureau, so he asks him to keep it a secret in exchange for not becoming enemies. The man leaves, and Shizuka thanks Sasaki for his help, explaining that she will help with whatever they want, even if it's an absurd request, so they ask for 300 tons of refined sugar. She assures them she'll get it within a week, and even lets them pay after delivery to maintain good relations with them. Sasaki receives a call from Hashizaki, and she asks if he's with Shizuka. He confirms that he is, and wonders if something happened. She asks them to return immediately, because the bureau is being attacked by the magical girl. She sends a helicopter to pick them up, and we see them approaching the bureau. We learn that an hour earlier, the magical girl suddenly appeared to invade the bureau, and this time she brought a friend. We see that Sasaki told Peeps to stay at home, and the situation is reported as a terrorist attack. They are almost hit by an energy beam, and Sasaki remembers how the girl hates psychics. They manage to land, and Sasaki regrets leaving Peeps behind, thinking he could have used his teleportation to send Shizuka next to the girls, and she could have solved everything in an instant, but he realizes he can't let the bureau know about Peeps. In the building, Hashizaki is with the other agents, and they fire at the two girls, but they can't get through their barrier. Akutsu watches from a control room, thinking the barrier is a problem, but he sees Sasaki arriving. Shizuka wonders if he has a plan, so Sasaki thinks about it, and realizes that they might not need to break the barrier. He suggests a water attack, but Shizuka doesn't understand what he's talking about. He explains that if he creates enough water inside the barrier, it will force the girls to undo it to breathe. Shizuka wonders if he can use his abilities inside their barrier, and Sasaki explains he needs to get close enough, but thinks it's worth a try. Shizuka agrees with his plan, but Sasaki asks her to just neutralize one of them and force the other to retreat, but Shizuka complains that he keeps making difficult requests. He explains that he wants her to be the savior of the bureau, and thinks the most important thing is to create a distraction, so he looks around and sees Akutsu's camera. Sasaki signals that he wants to act, so Akutsu tells Hashizaki to attack. They start attacking, and she uses her water against the girls. The blonde girl gets angry and decides to finish them, but Sasaki takes the opportunity and recites his spell, creating water inside their barrier. The girls realize they need to undo the barrier or else they will drown, so she makes small holes to drain the water, but Sasaki creates even more water, and the holes are sealed with ice. They try to make more openings, but they keep getting closed. They start to have water up to their necks, and Shizuka appears behind them, putting her hand through one of the holes, and she manages to knock out one of the girls, causing the barrier to release. The blonde girl becomes furious, so she launches an energy attack at Sasaki, but he blocks it with some ice. Shizuka wonders if she wants to continue, warning that it will take 3 days for the other girl to recover. The girl promises to pay her back, but they retreat through a portal. Suddenly, the agents point their guns at Shizuka, but she questions why they are doubting their trump card. Sasaki tries to explain that she's an ally, and Hashizaki asks if the water was his doing. He confirms it was, and Akutsu suddenly appears. He's upset that they didn't capture the girls, but thanks them for resolving the situation with minimal damage. Sasaki wonders why the girls attack the agency, and Akutsu explains that she tried this before, so she probably thought she could win with help from another girl. Shizuka thinks they might attack again, so it would be good to strengthen their forces. Akutsu realizes what she means, so he announces that he wants to officially hire her, and she's happy to hear this. He wants Sasaki to pass on the details, implying he will take care of her. Shizuka seems happy with this, so Sasaki realizes he will be her guardian, but decides to not think too much about it. Akutsu asks Sasaki to accompany him, so they go to his office. Akutsu questions him about the water, and Sasaki explains that the repeated use of his ability must have improved it. Akutsu also wonders about the place where the helicopter picked them up, and asks if he had any trouble with Shizuka. Sasaki realizes that Akutsu must have already spoken with Shizuka's former boss, and he understands that Akutsu wants to grasp his intentions, so he explains that he got involved in a conflict with Shizuka's former organization, and says he will submit the report by the end of the day. Akutsu mentions he will leave Shizuka under Sasaki's supervision, but he still needs to go on missions with Hashizaki. He asks him about Shizuka, and Sasaki explains that her motives seem genuine, and he believes she's a good addition to the team. Akutsu doesn't understand how Sasaki became so close to her so quickly, but he decides not to interfere as long as it benefits the organization. He allows Sasaki to share information with her about the next steps, and asks Sasaki to keep acting in the Bureau's best interest. Sasaki goes to a supermarket before heading home, happy to have made it through the day, but thinks he's almost a triple agent due to his relationship with the magical girl. He can't take Peeps on missions, so he thinks about practicing his magic. He sees Adanari, and she notices that they haven't seen each other in a while. Sasaki tries to give her food, but she reveals that she heard him talking to someone in the apartment. He realizes she overheard him talking to Peeps and explains that a friend has been visiting him lately. He gives her the food and decides to leave, telling her to let him know if anything else bothers her. As he gets back, he makes a stew with Kobe beef, and it reminds him of their early days together and everything they've been through. He reflects on how they couldn't even afford Kobe beef before, but now they're enjoying it together. His life is different from what he imagined, but he's happy with how things turned out. Sasaki asks Peeps about his day, and Peeps decides to show him something. He presents a report explaining that the time difference is rapidly decreasing, and in 6 months, one day in the other world will exactly equal a day in this world. Sasaki wonders if it's a cyclical event, but Peeps thinks they need more data, so he suggests they travel more frequently. Sasaki agrees, and they hear a knock on the wall. Sasaki thinks he's been talking too loudly, so the neighbor is complaining, wondering if it's Adenari. Peeps suggests turning on the TV to muffle the sound, but they hear a news report about a monster sighting, and they wonder why a lizard man from the other world has appeared. Meanwhile, in Adenari's apartment, we see her looking terrified, as a strange boy appears, introducing himself as a demon, and he tells her she will be fighting against the angels in his place. But that's where this series ends for now. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.